This is Play-by-Playcast.
Is that faster than a Greyhound?
The podcast about play-by-play guys. For play-by-play guys, by, I'm told, a play-by-play guy.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Now here's the host of Play-by-Playcast, Tom Bodett. Wait, the Motel 6 guy?
We'll leave the light on for you.
No, Joel Godet.
Joe Godet.
Joel.
Joel?
Joel, with an L.
Okay, here's your host, Joel Godet.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
All right, it's episode number 146 of Play-by-Playcast. Thanks as always for the subscribe, the stream, the download, however you have found this here podcast. It is the podcast about play-by-play broadcasters for play-by-play broadcasters, hosted by a play-by-play broadcaster, a professional development podcast that dives into the tips, tricks, experience, stories, process, and preparation of some of the biggest and best play-by-play announcers in the business. My name is Joel Godet. You can find this podcast on social media at PXPcast, or you can find me at Joel Godet. Shoot me an email as well, jgodett@bsu.edu. Our guest today is Paul Keels. He's the longtime voice, two-decade voice, since the late 90s, of the Ohio State Buckeyes, baritone voice of gold. He'll join us here momentarily. It's the first time, I think, in this podcast's history, I have recorded the intro, and the outro for that matter, without having heard the interview. I taped the intro and then spoke to Paul Keels. So we're both about to find out what Paul is going to say together right here. Paul's been a voice for all seasons. Experience in baseball, a little bit with the Reds, earlier in his career as well, and then we'll talk, I think, about his involvement in the early running to become one of the first voices of the Tampa Bay Rays, or at that point the Tampa Bay Devil Rays. Football, basketball, most certainly at Ohio State, and previously in his career at Michigan. Yeah, not just a house divided, broadcaster divided. Well, we know who writes the checks, so not split loyalties, but he has had dual loyalties, or one loyalty at a time. At various points in his career, he also did spend some time with the Detroit Pistons earlier on in his career as well. If you live in the state of Ohio, you know those deep pipes, and they join us now. Paul Keels, our guest on episode 146 of PXPcast.
Well, really, a lot of it has to do, Joe, with the great passion that people have for Ohio State football and basketball to a lesser extent. But, you know, something that so many people have grown up following as a sports team that has meant so much to everybody, whether they've attended Ohio State or not. And I think what we've found over the years, at least in the 21 years I've been doing this, is there's so many people that don't watch it on TV or can't watch it on TV and can't attend the game. So the radio ends up being an accompaniment to their busy lives, whether they're taking their kids to their games or whether they're at work or they're going from one place to another. And I think we just have been able to find over the years that it's still something that's very much a part of keeping people connected to an athletic program that means so much to them.
How awesome is that responsibility when you think about it in those terms?
It's it's very awesome, but I can also say too that it's the same approach that I had when I was doing games at the University of Cincinnati. I'm sure the same approach that people take, whatever school it is that they're announcing games for. You want to do all of the things that do justice to the effort to, you know, making sure that those that are listening are given as much information as you could give them, that they're following the game as much as they need to. So, you know, that kind of reminds me a few years ago when the Big Ten Network first came out and they were having issues with games being carried by the local cable distributors. And there was one of the first games and it wasn't going to be seen widely in Columbus. Somebody asked if that meant that we put more effort into that game than any others. Like, no, you don't really do it any different, regardless of, you know, how much it's televised or all of that. You do the same for, you know, a game that's of big importance, like a conference championship game or a bowl game, as you would for a non-conference game that's got a big point spread.
Yeah, now that it's not on television, I will prepare for this one. Would be the odd way to do that. What is your approach to a game? How long? Like, how do you lay out your football week when you're getting ready for a Saturday?
Well, a lot of that has to do with there's usually a Monday press conference with a head coach. And then also out of that is the time that I have to get with the head coach to record. We do little 2-minute daily shows that run Monday through Friday. Then the rest of the week also is kind of dictated with a Thursday 1-hour weekly radio show with a head coach. And that also involves recording the Saturday pregame interview. But around that, then, we have a 2-hour Monday night show that airs on our network that I'm involved in with a handful of other people. The weekly on-air responsibilities I have with our radio station. And then in the middle of all of that, you're working on your game chart, going through game notes, trying to put as much information on your chart, probably more information than you would ever use. And then also what I've done over recent years, we have a DVR. It allows you to record games of the upcoming opponents and be able to watch that as much as possible, just to get familiar with the names and numbers of players on the other teams, knowing that you're more familiar with Ohio State. So it's the course of the week is most of the work. And I like to tell people it's kind of like preparing for a test in school. You do most of the work before the test, so that by the time it gets there, you've hopefully got everything where you need to have it.
How do you cut through the noise in a setting like that, though? And what I mean is, if you go to a press conference, certainly you'll learn something from that, but you also will get a lot of the coach speak answers to that. And when you start researching players, I used to be the person who would sit in front of my computer and would scribble down, okay, well, this fifth-year senior, when he was a freshman, averaged 2.3 points per game, and against Stony Brook had 15 on this night in January. And eventually you realize it's good to be prepared, but at some point it's like paralysis by analysis. What cuts through for you, and what are the most important things you need to know and find so it can narrow down just sitting there and thumbing through everything over the course of 6 days leading up?
Well, in a lot of cases, some of that will involve with a particular player or a team, what they've done during the course of that season. And you can even trim it down even further. What did they do the previous week? You can also go back and look at, maybe what they did the previous year against the same opponent. Sometimes going back into their high school background can be a little helpful, but that's where you can get a little crazy. And the other part of it too is, especially on radio, you have to be careful about really whipping people with too many stats, because folks that are listening on the radio, they're basically listening to keep up with what's going on in the present, what's going on in the game. So you can round things out about how many carries and how many yards they have in that particular game, or how many catches or how many passes. But the thing you don't want it to get in the way of is the score and the time. And, I was taught a long time ago, you can never get the score and the time too much, describing what part of the field the ball's on, whether it's the right, the left, the opponent's 20-yard line, Ohio State's 20-yard line. So you don't want to get the stats to get in the way of the basics. And also it's not so much comparable to TV, but it's not a bad thing to have a little bit of applause and a little bit of the crowd natural sound to kind of blend in with all of it too.
How descriptive do you like to get? See the smoke coming out of the guy's, face mask, and wipes his hand on his towel, extends his hands, takes the snap, or can sometimes that get too much for some people to handle if they're just trying to tune in for what's happening while they're in the car, or have it in their ear as they're doing something else?
I think a lot of that has to do with the pace of the game, and especially in football now, in these days of up-tempo offense, you really don't have an opportunity to do a lot of that. But certainly some of that is nice, because you're trying to create the image for those who can't see it. So, but the main focus, at least what I try to do, is from football on offense, is set the formation, and use things like right and left and not near and far. Because if you think about it, somebody listening, they don't know what near side and far side is, because they're not seeing it the way you are. So mostly formation, placement. If you have have the opportunity to do something like wipes his hands on a towel or things like that, then, that will kind of allow for itself. But just trying to give the picture of what the field looks like and the players look like, given whatever time restraints you have, is probably the most important thing.
Do you long for days of slower offenses so that you can be a little bit more of an artiste?
It kind of comes and goes. I mean, we'll see some of it during the course of one game. You'll see the up-tempo, and then, and oftentimes in Ohio State's cases, when they've got a sizable lead in the second half, you see that slow down some. So you see a little bit of both in a particular game.
I had read an article where Matt LePay was quoted talking about you, and he said that you allow someone else to do the screaming, and just that you are very tempered in the way that you approach things. And like when I listen back to my own stuff sometimes, screaming is not the right word, but like you listen to it, it's like, gosh, I got maybe too excited in that moment. Even if it's a big play, it's like I wish there would have been at least a little bit more of a levelness to it. How did you develop the ability to look at everything in a very even keel fashion so that it comes out that way as a product on air?
Well, some of it just comes from the fact that you watch the game differently when you're announcing it than you do as a fan. I'm sitting at home watching one of my hometown teams, and it's easy to scream and yell and want to throw things at the TV and all that. But when you're watching it while you're working, your attention and your focus is a little different. And, the thought is always make sure you're still describing it so that the people who are listening can understand what you're saying. Because I know what it's like when you listen to people when they're screaming and yelling so much, you don't know what's going on. So, yes, you want to inject enthusiasm, especially when the team you're broadcasting for is playing well. And there's nothing wrong with putting some excitement in, even when an opposing team makes a truly outstanding play. So, but it's remembering that you're working the game not as a fan, even though you are a fan of the team that you're broadcasting for. But the focus is make sure that you're addressing it so that the people that are listening can understand it, given however much emotion you may throw into it.
Can you take me through your thought process on real big calls? I'm talking like national championship enders or calls that take Ohio State to the Final Four. Do you think about them? I don't mean it from like do you sit down and plan it out or write it out, but when there's 4 minutes left in a game, will you sit there and think to yourself, all right, Paul, gather kind of where you want to go with this if this is how this ends so that you don't get caught not knowing what to say at the end of a game?
No, I don't. And, it's funny you bring that up because somebody did going into the 2002 national championship game. Somebody did ask me on one of our pregame shows if I had a line or a couple of lines prepared. And I don't. And I think a lot of that is because when you hear people do that, you can tell that it's kind of a rehearsed thing. And it doesn't always sound, at least I don't think it sounds natural. Just like, to prepare the opening of a broadcast or something. It just trying to ad-lib it and just make it sound like a conversation. I remember the first basketball game I did with Ron Stokes. He asked me, he said, what are you going to say to get us started? I said, Ron, I have no idea. It'll just happen when it happens. Now, I just think that when you try and do that, it comes off canned and like it's rehearsed and maybe not authentic. And that's not to take away from people who do that. It's just not my feeling about how to approach it. And, I think when you're able to just kind of go with it as you would a conversation with somebody, it comes off, at least hopefully from what we do, it comes off genuine and sincere. It's funny because somebody, I think it was the end of the 2002 regular season when Ohio State beat Michigan and you knew they were going to go to the Fiesta Bowl and play for the national championship. I spit out the line, the Buckeyes are headed to the desert. That wasn't anything that I had thought about ahead of time. It's just kind of what came out. So that's just my feeling and my opinion on it. I think it just it allows you to just be a little, I'm trying to think of the right word here, just a little more impromptu, a little more
authentic,
authentic or a little more just in the moment.
Do you remember what you said when they won in 2002?
Just that they'd won the national championship, I think it was. And, I know Jim was yelling in the background and it was kind of because of the way that season went and that game went, it was kind of a stunned surprise to all of us. So, and I don't remember specifically what it was, the same as when they won it in 2014 and the same as, 3 different Final Fours with basketball. You just, it's nothing, at least in my mind, that's terribly memorable. Maybe it probably isn't to other people. It's just, you just try to make sure that people understand that they won, get the score out there and point out the significance that, they've won a national championship.
Is that really the crux of it, though, too? Do we make too much of it as announcers that, listen, at the end of the day, if you say the Buckeyes have won the national championship, it's not frilly, but it gets the point across, and it's right and it's accurate, and if you say it with the right emotion, that will live on like it needs to in the annals of Buckeye history.
Well, I think that oftentimes when somebody is sharp enough or quick enough to come up with a catchy line that has been authentic and unique, then that kind of helps make the point even more. But yeah, you can get a little too caught up in trying to make it a catchy phrase or something like that. It's, again, it's being simplistic, especially for radio, and maybe it's the same for TV in instances like that. But, it's about what's just happened. It's kind of like the way people view officials. Good officials in most games, you don't notice. And so what you hope is, as announcers, that people are more focused on what's happened in the game and you being able to keep them up on the game and less about what you said and how you said it.
Except in the final 2 minutes, because then you notice all of them nowadays.
Well, but hopefully not. I mean, you hope that what was a foul 10 minutes left to go in the game is the same as one with 2 minutes left in the game.
I've read too, and I've heard you talk about the fact that you were the higher voice or the squeakier voice of those in your early years of your career. But I'm curious because I also know that you sang in high school and you did some musicals and things of that nature. How long have you sounded like this? And have you put in work and really worked to hone the instrument to get it to the point where you've got the baritone that everyone knows?
Well, my response to things like that usually is your own voice doesn't sound the same to you as it does to everybody else. And I don't know if that's a physical thing, a biological thing, an auditorial thing. But, people are very flattering and complimentary in the things they say to me about the sound of my voice. But it doesn't sound that way to me. And I imagine a lot of people can kind of understand that. But I've been fortunate that people have felt that it has helped me. Back in the very early 80s when I worked in Detroit, I worked for a CBS All News radio station. That I was probably the youngest person on the on-air staff, but the guys that had voices that would make the floor rumble. And I did feel like I was the token soprano working around some of the people that I worked with back then who had a lot more experience. But have also tried to be very mindful of, you're right, your voice is your instrument and you have to take care of it. You have to, not abuse it. About 20 years ago, the first time I ever came down with laryngitis, I went to an ENT and he told me something very significant. He said, well, it's kind of like a baseball pitcher with his arm. You have to rest it. It's something that, yes, it's your livelihood and all of that, but you can't over abuse it. And it was interesting. He said the people that they deal with laryngitis and vocal problems more than anybody are school teachers because of how much they're talking in front of a class. So that's always been something that stuck with me in the last 20 years. It helps when you live by yourself and there's not anybody else in your house with you for most of the time that you don't have to talk with. But the voice does need rest. And the other part of it too is not pushing it, not trying to make it sound like something that it's not. And everybody likes to get caught up in projection. And, from my musical background, I do know about pushing from the diaphragm and things like that. But also you have to make your voice sound natural. You can't change your voice. You can't do anything about that, whether it's too high, too low, whatever it is. That the only thing you can do is just make it as clear as you can and project it as well as you can.
What was your favorite role, by the way?
Oh my goodness, you've taken me way back to so many years. I probably the one that I would think about it, and it's because it was my first year in college, and I was in a musical production of the I Sing at Xavier, and I was given a role that so many upperclassmen really wanted. It was the role of a French ambassador who kind of had to sing and speak with a French accent, and I had mostly taken Spanish classes, so I really struggled to try to get a French accent down. But probably that one, in some ways, because it was one that was coveted. I also did a production of my first year in college, or maybe my second year in college, in a musical called Babes in Arms. I was very fortunate to have the lead role in that, and had a chance to do a number of solos during that production. So it was kind of neat to be able to have a lead role for one time in the show.
Was that always a fun thing on the side, or do you ever think back and say, I wonder if I had traveled down that path?
It was always a fun thing, just because, even as a young kid, I didn't, the grade school, Catholic grade school parish I grew up in. I was part of the grade school choir, had done a lot of singing in group settings, fortunate to do some singing in individual settings. And my senior year in high school, I got involved in a high school musical, actually not at my high school, but in the neighboring all-girls high school, that recruited a lot of us guys that we had grown up with some of these girls. And I just saw how much fun it was. Not just the performance part of it, but just how much fun everybody had in a senior class play. And it made me wish that I had done it previous to my senior year. And that's why I continued to get involved in community theater in my college years. And it was just, it made for a great group and a very different group of friends from what I had in some of the other things I'd done.
I want to go back to the laryngitis piece too. Was that in season that you came down with that, or was it out of season?
You know what? I think it was out of season.
Okay.
So it wasn't but I have, had a couple of different times, and actually this past football season I had an issue in one particular weekend, just with kind of a allergy flare up that kind of creates for a little, for lack of better terms, throat congestion. And I couldn't quite push my voice the way I normally would. And it's one of those things you just kind of have to learn your own tricks of what help you get through things like that. I'm very fortunate to have a membership in the downtown YMCA in Columbus, and they've got a steam room that whenever I get the indication that something's kind of going that way, I spend more time in the steam room. A few of the tricks like the hot water and tea and honey and all of that stuff. But it's just a matter of when you start to feel it, you're getting a cold or you're getting something like that, you got to get on top of trying to just make yourself a little better. And it also involves, because I've got a regular daily routine at our station. And if I've got to beg off of some of the weekly stuff to be ready for a weekend, then, I've got to raise my hand and speak up on that too.
Yeah, I feel like I've got like a doctor of pseudoscience in terms of everything I lay out in front of me when I'm not feeling great to try to get myself through something. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone else, but it works for me, so it is what it is there. What do you do with the radio station regularly too? Like what are the demands of you in your regular job on top of being the voice of the Buckeyes?
Well, outside of the game schedule and travel for football and basketball and everything, and our station is an all-sports radio station. So we have, during the course of the day, top of the hour sports updates. So I'm involved in doing those during afternoon drive time, as well as sports updates that we do for our statewide news service, the Ohio News Network. So that is a majority of the Monday through Friday obligation that I have. And that's my involvement once basketball is over until football starts. And so it does involve being at the radio station every day for the most part. And it does, when you get into football and basketball schedule, it does add to your workload a little bit. But that's kind of part of the agreement I made when I came to work there was, not just to do the football and basketball stuff and the coaches shows, but also to be a part of the everyday programming.
Have you ever thought, especially as the industry has evolved as well, the idea of what are the other things to do to make yourself more valuable, in essence, to an employer? I guess, I don't know, I feel like particularly recently when you start getting into more multimedia things and lots of different avenues for content, how have you approached that in terms of still staying on, I guess, the most cutting edge you can be of the media side of things?
Well, I've been fortunate in that I've really not been asked to do an awful lot regarding the social media things that become the additional responsibilities. I do a little bit on Twitter, but it's not something that I've been asked to do or encouraged to do. It's just something I've done on my own. I'm fortunate enough that they allow me that most of my responsibility is the on-air part, whether it's the football and basketball games or doing the sports updates.
That's nice.
The thing that I learned a long time ago, and I've tried to really do, in the last 21 years, and that is be a good option for our sales departments. And I kind of have to deal with two sales departments. That's our network sales staff and our local station sales department, in being amenable to meeting with clients, to talking with them about advertising, being available within certain limitations that have been placed on me about doing commercials for people, to be at speaking engagements, things of that nature. So one of the things I've really tried to do, and it's really helped because by and large, you've got a great group of sales reps to work with, and that is just be helpful to them in dealing with their clients. And sometimes it's even just something as simple as, hey, they're meeting with some clients for happy hour. Do you want to come and just spend a little time with them? So that's something, when I first got started in this business in the late 70s, I saw how great it was to see some of these salespeople interact with their clients. I also had a different perspective of it because my father's company at times was an advertiser with different stations that I worked for. And sometimes his company was not an advertiser with stations I worked for, because even though I worked there, it wasn't something that was a fit for his business. So that's the thing that outside of the on-air part that I've really tried to be as available as I can, and that's to help the salespeople with their goals.
Where else has the industry changed most for the better or for the worse in the last 30 years?
I think the biggest change in this industry is the fact that you have fewer and fewer competitor stations. And what I mean by that is, so many of these companies now own multiple stations in the same market, so you don't have the competition that and a lot of this came from maybe because of getting started working in the news end of things, when there were so many stations that had news departments of more than a couple of people, but there's not that push to try and make you work harder to get better, and also what that's done too is it's taken away the friendly camaraderie that you had with people at other stations. That's probably the biggest change that I've noticed. There just aren't the expansive number of people that can get into this business and can do the same type of things, and that you can listen to as a competitor, learn something from, but also where you can share some experiences with people that are in competitive stations. There just doesn't seem to be as much of that anymore, and I think that's unfortunate.
And the idea of having like multiple voices of Michigan football back early in your career.
Well, that was something, and if you think back to it, Iowa did the same thing for a number of years. Even with Ohio State, there were multi-agreements with more than one broadcast company. But, when I worked in Detroit, when Michigan did that was Don Canham, who was the athletic director at Michigan. He had the bright idea that, he could get at that time when I was there were 5 stations that did football. So that was 5 different companies that were paying Michigan rights fees. But it also, there were a number of different people who gave Michigan coverage, people that you got to know who did kind of the same thing. They did it differently, but you had great experiences being around those people. But that's where I think just because you don't have as many stations that in a particular market that have as many different people doing things that for a listening audience, that takes away options for them.
What's one thing you've not called yet in your career that you want to call?
Oh, that's a good question. I've never done hockey, but I don't know the sport well enough to do it. I've substituted as a PA announcer for hockey games.
I was going to say, so if Bobby Mack got sick, it would be a slow jump.
I couldn't bluff my way through that. No. I've had I guess I would say, ever to do a World Series, even though my baseball experience has been somewhat limited. But growing up in a baseball town and having been a lifelong Reds fan, especially during the days of the Big Red Machine, that would certainly seem to be something that would be an awful lot of fun. Having the chance to do a couple of Rose Bowls now has been an exciting thing. To do a national championship game in basketball was a very exciting experience in 2007. So I look more at it as being fortunate to do the things that I've done rather than what's out there that I haven't had a chance to do.
Well, I wanted to dovetail off of that, though, because I know, and you've talked about being involved in the pursuit of the Rays job, or the Devil Rays job, back when they first started in 1998, back before you were at Ohio State. And I think of it from the standpoint of, did you know back then kind of where you wanted to go long term? People have always asked me, and they still ask me, like, well, where do you ultimately want to end up? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I'm happy doing this. If this is what it is, then great. If that's what it is, then great. If that other thing is what it is, then great. Did you kind of think to yourself, I want to be a pillar of Ohio State, and I want to be a big-time Division I voice, or I want to be a Major League Baseball voice, and or I want to be an NFL voice long-term? And how did you maybe strategically think about that in your mind in terms of where you wanted to steer your career to best accomplish a goal?
The best way to start answering that was what I wanted to do was do the best at whatever job I had at the present time. It wasn't, looking for one specific thing or another. Now, there was a period of time, excuse me, in the mid to late 80s, after I left Detroit and before I got back to Cincinnati the second time, that I wasn't able to have the opportunity to be a play-by-play announcer for a particular team. And so that was something that I always wanted to do. And I was very fortunate in 1989 when I was hired to come back to Cincinnati to do games for the University of Cincinnati. And then after 3 years, the station I was at gave up the rights. There were 2 years that I wasn't able to do the games because of the situation that involved where the rights went to. So my thought always was I wanted to be involved in things wherever it was. But once I had gotten back to my hometown in Cincinnati after being gone for the better part of 8 years, I knew that all things being equal, I wanted to stay there. And then in 1995, I guess it was, when I got the opportunity to return to doing the University of Cincinnati, then my pursuit was just to continue to do that. And then in 1996, the opportunity to do the Bengals opened up for one season. So I did the Bengals as well as the University of Cincinnati. The Bengals contract with WLW ended after that. So my opportunity was lost. And after that, and because of the company's affiliation with the radio station in Tampa that had the rights for the Devil Rays as they were coming into existence, that created the opportunity to interview for that.
Gotcha.
And to be able to, be one of the final four for the two jobs that were being offered. So it wasn't that, I think everybody who grows up around a baseball team and understands the great romanticism of baseball and radio, you hope that that's an opportunity. But, I had not taken the route of going through minor league baseball, so I knew the chances were iffy. There had been a brief discussion years before that with the San Diego Padres for an opening that they had, and I had done some fill-in baseball work. But basically my approach was just do the best at whatever it was you had. And the Ohio State thing was something that came out of the blue. I did not know the job was going to become open. I was contacted by somebody that I knew from the late 70s about it. And so it wasn't something that I ever had on my radar. I was just going to work at doing the best at the job that I had at the present time.
And then that puts you in the right position, obviously, when the right opportunity comes along as well, when you live in the present.
Well, and I think sometimes what you have to be careful about is if you're constantly looking at what's next and you're constantly looking at other jobs, it maybe doesn't do the best service to the job you have at the present time. And
Yep.
And the other thing is that it may not necessarily be the best thing in the world as far as a reflection upon your employers.
Yeah, true. You've worked in all of those stops, though. You've worked with some very interesting characters, colorful characters from a coaching standpoint, be it Jim Tressel or Bob Huggins or most recently Urban Meyer. What do you learn? Like, how does working with men like that make you a better broadcaster? And I guess I particularly most recently working with someone like Urban Meyer. What's different about that, or what makes you better by being around him or them?
Well, they're all different in their own ways, and the most important thing is just to listen and try and absorb as much as you can from them about their approach to a season, to a team, to players as individuals, and just kind of pick up on how they approach everything and how it ties into what goes on with their teams. And also the other thing about it too is being respectful of their time.
Yep.
Especially the Ohio State head football coaching position. There are so many demands on their time. You're just, and they're contractually obligated to do quite a few things with us, but it's be mindful of their time, do what you need to do. If they want to sit and chat and they want to, give you more information and more things, great. If they don't, then that's fine too. So it's, learning a little bit of how to deal with them, what the differences are in their personalities. And it's a real education, because there are some people that you learn a lot more from, some you don't, some that you realize they really enjoy doing these types of things, some that they just kind of do it because they have to do it, and some that really don't care to do it. And so it's a very educational experience.
I think about, like, when I first got the Ball State job, I could sit in Pete Lembo's office, who was the football coach at the time, and like we would just talk. And I was thinking about it last night in preparation for this, and I was like, I wonder how often you could sit in Urban Meyer's office and just talk about life, because of the demands on his time, and how, even though you're the voice of Ohio State, what is the access like, and how do you have to handle that and get what you need, build the relationships you need, while also being a piece in a very large machine?
Well, it's very different from each person. And with Urban, it was not Urban's favorite thing to do, even though he was contractually obligated to do it. And walk in, sit down, turn the recorder, do the stuff, get done, say thanks, see you later, bye. There wasn't developing of a personal relationship. There were a few instances where there was a chance to yak a few more times other than that. But usually that was outside of the season. Probably the best personal interaction I had with him was last summer at an event in Cincinnati, and it didn't involve me having to interview or anything like that. But doing the things that we had to do were not his favorite thing to do. He would much rather be figuring out how to convert a third down play. But then there are other guys like Bob Huggins. You could sit there and talk forever and ever and ever with Bob. Sometimes, Bob, you'd have to stop him so that you could do the interview and get done. But that's just, the difference. There's people. Thad Matta was very much the same way. Thad could sit and talk to you, for lengthy periods of time about things that either involved basketball or not. Chris Holtman is very similar in just how easy and forthcoming and open he is about things both on and off the record. John Cooper was fabulous about the amount of time that he gave you and the access that he gave you. It's different amongst the different people, and your relationship. Maybe one of the best examples I give was Luke Fickell in 2011. Luke was thrown into a very difficult position when he was made the head coach at Ohio State for a season, but because of having been around him, I had actually gotten to know Luke's parents through a non-working relationship. So it created a good comfort zone to deal with a guy that was dealing with a very unusual and difficult situation and handled it probably better than anybody could have, given everything that was going on with it. So it just depends on the person and how you get to know them, if you've known them before and things like that.
Before I let you go, who is the most athletically related, most famous alum from Moeller High School in Cincinnati?
I'd say it'd be a tie between Barry Larkin and Ken Griffey Jr., but I think Buddy Bell has to be up there near the top of the list as well.
Where's Paul Keels?
Oh, as far as athletics, not even on the radar. No. I mean, if you think about the people that have come out of our high school, Bob Crable, who was a great linebacker at Notre Dame, John Boehner, who was the Speaker of the House for the United States. We've been very fortunate to have some fantastic people come out of Moeller who've done a lot of great things that have not involved athletics. But, no, Paul Keels is, no, as far as athletics, nowhere up on that list.
All right, that is Paul Keels joining us here on Play-by-Playcast. Thanks, as always, to Paul for joining us for what I can only presume was a fantastic conversation that, again, at the time of this recording, has not happened yet. So it went well. Find him on social media at Paul Keels. Pretty straightforward. And you can find him on the air as well for Ohio State football and men's basketball games, and 97.1 The Fan in Columbus. If you get the opportunity, drop him a line on Twitter. Let him know you caught the pod. Or if you know him, let him know you caught the pod through other channels. We always appreciate it when folks reach out and let our guests know that their time was well used and appreciated by those that were on the other end of the conversation. Also, rate and review the pod if you get an opportunity here. Stop and throw some stars and or comment our way on iTunes. We always appreciate that. And then we will see you back here next week for another episode of PXPcast. In the meantime, 7-day hiatus for us. Talk to you next Friday. Same bad time, same bad channel. We're out.
And that will do it from St. Louis, where the score is inconclusive.